Добрий день, з вами Ольга.
Good afternoon, my name is Olga Atamanova and Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform continues its operation. Today it's day 513 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor, and I traditionally want to thank the representatives of all the mass media who tell the world the truth about this war. Now we will be talking about the draft law on English language. Joining us online is Mykyta, Poturaev, chair of the Humanitarian and Information Policy Committee of the Parliament of Ukraine. Good afternoon, Mr. Mykyta. Good afternoon. Humanitarian Committee of the Parliament unanimously supported the presidential draft law 9432. So what are the changes we should expect for, and what about the articles that were subject to discussion in the society? Yes, we really removed those articles, those provisions about the dubbing before the first reading, or reduction of the dubbing fraction of the cinematic production in Ukrainian language, and we've removed everything that was related to the cinemas and television. So I think that the draft law will pass the parliament without problems. Why have we done it in that way? We've held consultations with the industries. We were in consultation with the Association of Cinemas. We've got quite an interesting statistics that I'm about to share with you. And we had consultations with the representatives of the sector, the industry which is involved in the dubbing of cinematic products in Ukrainian language. We got some applications from the civil organizations that with the proposals to remove those provisions, they were in line with the expert opinions. So after the calm and professional discussions, we've decided to not edit but just remove those provisions from the draft. So in terms of movies or demonstration of the films in television, nothing is going to change for the Ukrainians, but the educational part rests, because it's not the first time that Ukraine is attempting to fulfill another set, to make steps to increase the volume of people who speak English language, or at least English language, or increase or improve the level of knowledge of English language in the society, specifically among the government officials and employees. And I hope that eventually this law will allow us to achieve success in this area, because unlike previous initiatives, it's the most profound, but it does not necessarily mean that there will be remarks submitted after the first reading which will be aimed to improve it, not to make it more narrow, but to improve it. And by the way, yesterday I've urged the authors of the alternative draft law, specifically Ms. Inna Sovsun and other colleagues, to take into account their proposals on improvement of the educational sphere, so they are submitted as the amendments after the first reading, because in my opinion those proposals were quite relevant. And I'm talking not as a politician but as a philologist, as the professor of the English language. This is my first education, so this is what in fact happened to the draft law. I'm convinced that it's about to be adopted in the first reading during the next session of the parliament, and then there will be certain time for submission of amendments, and by the end of December I hope it will have been adopted after the second reading and take effect respectively. Ms. Mykyta, so what will be the spheres covered by this draft law on top of education? You say that there's a lot about the educational sector, so what is the first thing that about to happen in the educational sector and how it will be felt by Ukrainians? Well, there should be conditions created to make sure that Ukrainians starting from kindergarten and all their life could learn English language. Let's start with English language. Obviously, we'd like our people to speak at least 2 European Union language, but let's start with English, because even with English we're having significant problems. This is why the draft law contemplates some options for the people to have access to educational tools, and it also envisages certain encouragements for the government officials so they learn English language, and it will open the way for them to move along the career ladder. It's important. It's not only important to create the conditions, but also to create the system of stimuli and encouragements. And this is what's done by this draft law. So it's not going to change anything in the life of the average people. I just hope that shortly there will be a lot more educational options for the citizens of Ukraine. Talking about the government officials, they should start pondering over those options. As soon as they emerge, they should start using them, because the knowledge of English language from office to office, from position to position, is different. I mean, the requirements, but it would be definitely very useful to be able to speak English language for your future. Mr. Mykyta, do I understand it correctly that we expect to have this draft law adopted this year? Well, obviously, absolutely, we want to have it adopted without any delays this year, because for us it's important. The knowledge of English language is increasingly getting more and more practical. For example, our warriors, they study abroad, and to get trained there you have to be able to speak English language, which is used in all NATO programs. The number of contacts with the European Union is growing, as well as with other partners, and we practically need to increase the amount and improve the level of knowledge of English language real quick. And we hope that after the victory there will be time for implementation of recovery programs in Ukraine. International specialists will come to help us, because we all hope that it will be not only financial aid but also technical engineering support, and we will have to communicate with those people desirably without translators and interpreters. There will be a lot of tourists for sure, because all of the world, all of the civilized world currently knows about Ukraine, and definitely millions of people want to see our country. They want to see the people who were resisting heroically. They want to see the glorious spots of that resistance. Unfortunately, also they want to see the places where those horrific crimes against humanity and other war crimes were committed, and we have to receive those people in a way that we don't lose the advantages that we paid such a significant price for. Good afternoon, Maria Kožuchar. The draft law contemplates that there are 8 categories of government officials who should be trained in English language. Are there any training courses contemplated by this draft law? And recently, Ivana Klimpushtinsadze stated that there was no public discussion of this draft law. Do you contemplate to have public and experts engaged in the discussion of this draft law before the second reading? Thank you. Well, look, I always encourage involvement of public, and the experts were involved in preparation of this draft law. At least during those discussions where I was taking part, there were also experts invited from educational sector first of all. So this stage was already passed, in fact, because if we say so, that let us involve the community who may not produce any expert opinion, it will result in the same thing that the story with the Holodomor Museum that is not going to exist. I don't believe that our society doesn't want to honor the memory of the millions of people who were tortured to death, or that the Ukrainian society doesn't want to support the Ukrainian culture. No single hryvnia for Ukrainian films or books should be allocated. So I don't encourage such a public discussion. I favor public discussion with the activists, with the experts, with the specialists in the area, who are not only the activists who work based on the principle who shuts louder, but the people who show some indifference. And we have to thank God that there is such a number of indifferent Ukrainians, indifferent to what's going on in Ukraine. So, but anyway, it should be a serious conversation, serious discussion. So obviously the experts should be involved, and between the first and the second reading, the educational part should be improved, as I mentioned, and I hope it's about to happen just in the same way that it was done before during the parliamentary committee meeting. We had a lot of people present. I want to emphasize it, many people who joined our meeting. But it happened so that everybody was more interested in the question of dubbing. But we had a joint position and we passed that issue quite quickly. We've discussed it quite quickly, but we've have to state about the improvement of the educational part. And talking about the government officials, not only government officials, but also other people should get access to the free English language training platforms, because if the government requires something, they should create the conditions in which the citizens could fulfill those requirements, because it doesn't happen any other way. Thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you for joining our broadcast. I'm reminding you, dear colleagues, joining us was Mykyta Poturaev, Chair of the Humanitarian and Information Policy Committee of the Parliament of Ukraine. Our team is working on the schedule for the next week. Stay tuned, follow our announcements. Let's continue working together for our victory. Glory to Ukraine.